Back at the turn of the millennium, Enron wasn't just some company, it was a phenomenon. It was praised everywhere as this beacon of modern innovation, one of the most admired corporations in America. But here's the thing. Behind the curtain of incredible stock prices and supposedly genius business models, a catastrophic secret was brewing. So how did this corporate superstar take such a spectacular fall? Let's unravel this story of epic deception.
At its absolute peak, Enron was a titan. We're talking a market capitalization, that's the total value of all its stock, of nearly $70 billion. That made it one of the biggest and seemingly most successful companies in the entire country. You can bet investors were thrilled, and its executives were treated like rock stars, like absolute visionaries.
And then, poof, it was all gone, almost overnight. That $70 billion empire collapsed into what was then the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history. Shareholder value was completely wiped out. Thousands of employees lost their jobs, their retirement, their life savings. The visionary company was now the poster child for corporate fraud.
And that is the central question we're tackling here, isn't it? This wasn't just a bad business decision or a slow decline. This was a complete and total implosion. So how on earth did they hide it for so long? And what was the one thing that finally brought the whole charade crashing down? We're about to figure it out, clue by clue.
All right, so our first clue doesn't come from some dusty accounting ledger. Nope, it comes from pure, shameless market manipulation. See, during the California energy crisis back in 2000 and 2001, you might remember the rolling blackouts, Enron's traders weren't just moving energy. They were gaming the entire system with schemes that had some, well, let's just say some very revealing nicknames.
And this isn't just speculation. Federal regulators eventually got their hands on Enron's own internal memos, what became known as the smoking gun documents. And they were just jaw-dropping. They laid out in plain English exactly how traders were squeezing California during a crisis, all for profit.
Okay, so get this. One of them was called the Death Star strategy. It sounds like something from a movie, and honestly, the scheme was just as wild. Enron would schedule fake energy trades to create the illusion that they were relieving congestion on the power grid. So California would pay them for this service, but in reality, Enron didn't move a single electron. They were getting paid millions for doing absolutely nothing.
Then there was another one called ricochet. Just think of it like money laundering, but for electricity. California had price caps on power that was generated inside the state to keep costs down. So what did Enron do? They'd buy that cheap power, send it on a quick round trip out of state, and then immediately sell it right back into California at a crazy high price, claiming it was expensive, imported power. It was a simple, cynical, and incredibly effective way to get around the rules.
This quote right here, this just says it all. This isn't an accusation from a reporter or a prosecutor. This is a direct line from an Enron legal memo. The sheer audacity to write it down is what's so stunning. They knew exactly what they were doing. Their main worry wasn't that it was wrong, but that it might create a public relations risk. Unbelievable.
Now, as shocking as those energy schemes were, they were really just a symptom of a much deeper disease. The real, rotten core of the Enron fraud was this incredibly complex accounting scheme. And it was all designed to do two things: hide billions of dollars in debt and literally invent profits out of thin air. Their main weapon of choice for this was something called a special purpose entity, or an SPE. Now, these things can be perfectly legitimate financial tools, but Enron, oh man, Enron created thousands of them, basically as shell companies. On paper, they look like independent businesses, but in reality, Enron was pulling all the strings. They used them for everything, to juice up profits, to hide mountains of debt, and to completely mislead anyone looking at their books. These SPEs were the engine of the fraud.
A perfect case study is an SPE they nicknamed Chuco. This one entity allowed Enron to hide over $600 million in debt that absolutely should have been on its public financial statements. And even worse, it let Enron book profits on deals it was basically just making with itself, which is one of the biggest no-nos in accounting. So how did this scam actually work? Well, there's a rule. For an SPE to be legally separate from the main company so you can keep its debt off your books, an independent outside investor has to put in at least 3% of the capital. They have to have some skin in the game. But for Chuco, that 3% wasn't from a real outside investor. Nope. It came from an Enron employee who got the money from a bank loan that Enron itself secretly guaranteed. So there was zero independent capital at risk. It was a complete fake-out.
So after they got away with schemes like Chuco, the deceptions just got bigger and more reckless.
Enron started using these SPEs not just to hide debt, but to create these so-called hedges against their own risky investments. But these hedges were built on a foundation of sand, turning the company into a true house of cards just waiting for a breeze.
And this is where the logic just completely falls apart. It's almost funny if it weren't so destructive. See, a hedge is supposed to be like insurance, right? You pay an outside party to protect you if your investment goes bad. But Enron's Raptor SPEs were insured using Enron's own stock. So think about it. When Enron's investment started losing money, its stock price also went down, which made the insurance totally worthless. It's like trying to save yourself from drowning by pulling up on your own hair. It provides zero real protection.
And the scale of the damage here is just staggering. I mean, the numbers are almost hard to wrap your head around. Chico hid over $600 million in debt. Other partnerships hid another $1.2 billion. And those useless Raptor hedges, they allowed Enron to pretend that over $1 billion in very real investment losses just didn't exist. This wasn't just creative accounting, this was creating a whole different financial reality.
Just let that sink in for a second. All the hype, all the glowing reports from Wall Street, that incredible stock price, it was all driven by profits that, in the end, were not real. Almost half of the earnings that made Enron the darling of the business world were completely and utterly fake.
Okay, so we've seen the how, the schemes, the fraudulent accounting, but that still doesn't answer the bigger question. Why? How does an entire organization become so rotten from the inside out? Well, the answer lies in a corporate culture that was deliberately crafted to reward arrogance, to punish questions, and to make everyone inside feel invincible.
Enron's culture was practically engineered for this to happen. They'd hire the so-called best and brightest from top schools, promise them massive fortunes, and then throw them into this brutal performance review system known as rank and yank. Every year, the bottom 15% of performers were fired. Period. This created this hyper-aggressive, paranoid environment where challenging your boss or questioning the ethics of a deal was basically career suicide. And really, nothing captures the moral black hole at the heart of Enron better than this. When audio tapes of their energy traders were finally released to the public, the world got to hear them laughing, bragging and joking about exploiting the California crisis, talking about all the money they were taking from Grandma Millie. It just showed a culture that was completely, terrifyingly detached from the real-world harm it was causing. So, when this massive house of cards finally collapsed, the shockwave was felt across the entire business world. The scandal triggered this huge crisis of confidence in corporate America and led directly to some of the biggest reforms in business regulation in generations.
In the end, it came so incredibly fast. From the CEO's surprise resignation in August to the bankruptcy filing in December, it took less than 4 months for the whole empire to just crumble into dust. But the response from lawmakers was almost as quick. By the very next summer, Washington had taken action.
That response was the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or as you'll often hear it called, SOX. This was a landmark law. It made CEOs and CFOs personally sign off on their financial statements, making them legally liable for their accuracy. It created new oversight for the accounting industry and made the penalties for fraud way tougher. It was basically designed to stop another Enron from ever happening again.
So what's the lasting legacy here? Enron's collapse fundamentally changed the rules of the game for big business in America. It kicked off a whole new era focused on transparency and accountability. Suddenly, the job of a corporate compliance officer became critical, and boards of directors were forced to actually pay attention and do their jobs. But the big question has always been, was it enough?
New laws were passed for sure, but Enron still stands as this powerful, cautionary tale of how easily greed and a broken culture can just steamroll any set of rules, which leaves us with a really critical question to think about. If a company that everyone admired could hide a fraudulent empire right in plain sight, what are the blind spots we might be missing right now?